Hello, I'm Peter Landers, Tokyo Bureau Chief of the Wall Street Journal, and I want to thank everyone for joining the Wall Street Journal Future Leaders webinar in conversation with Keio University. Let me mention a couple of items as we get started. The session will be recorded, is being recorded now, and the video will be posted online after this is over, so you'll have a chance to view it again. And we have a great panel tonight, so we'll get to the panel in just a moment. I'll start with a quote from Chinese leader Xi Jinping, who said a decade ago that, quote, "Whoever gets control of the data controls the initiative." And whatever you think of Xi Jinping, I think you'd have to agree that he made a good prediction about what would happen today in 2023. Data is, in fact, our theme today. It is at the heart of what Professor Kokuryo, who we'll hear from shortly, calls a cyber civilization. We'll talk about how control of data is at the heart of the tensest and most important global relationship today, the relationship between the US and China. We'll talk about leadership in artificial intelligence, and we'll talk about what governments and regular folks can do to bring out the best of cyber civilization, which I think is going to stay with us, whether we like it or not. So much of what we read in the news today, I think, touches on these themes. We had an exclusive opinion poll in the Wall Street Journal just 2 weeks ago of US voters, and the headline was nearly half of US voters would ban TikTok. That's the video app so many young people use, more than 100 million in the US alone, many hundreds of millions globally. And according to our poll, most voters in the US view this video app as a national security risk. And that's because data about what Americans are doing online could, in theory, be funneled to China's communist leaders, although TikTok's owner says that that wouldn't happen. It wouldn't do that. And 3 days after that poll appeared, China rewrote its law against espionage to tighten state control over data and digital activities. And the government has raided offices of firms doing independent information gathering. And then here in Japan, the digital ministers of the Group of Seven Nations, and we'll hear from an experienced digital minister in a moment, of the Group of Seven Nations, they met in Gunma Prefecture and discussed a multitude of digital issues, including artificial intelligence. The ministers said they want to promote human-centric and trustworthy AI. And they said, quote, "We oppose the misuse and abuse of AI to undermine democratic values." So all that is just 1 week at the end of April. I'm delighted to have a distinguished panel tonight. Dr. Karen Makishima, PhD, member of parliament, was Japan's second digital minister, serving from fall 2021 to 2022. And all three of our panelists today are authors of recent books. So I've brought them with me today. This is Dr. Makishima's book, Can Japan Become a Leading Digital Nation? It's written in Japanese. Also tonight, we have Professor Jiro Kokuryo of Keio University, a pioneer, a scholar in digital issues for 3 decades. And his book, also in Japanese, is a theory of cyber civilization. And finally, my colleague Josh Chin, who is a deputy bureau chief for China of the Wall Street Journal, is the author of the recently published, co-author, I should say, of the recently published A Surveillance State Inside China's Quest to Launch a New Era of Social Control. So these are all great themes. Let me start with you, Dr. Makishima. You worked hard when you were digital minister to bring more digital benefits to Japanese people. For example, in the app that records our vaccine history, I have one on my phone, and it works very well, thank you. I appreciate that. Is now the time for more control to make sure data doesn't fall into the wrong hands? Tell us about your philosophy about regulating data.
Thank you very much for having me today. It's very exciting format to talk about data, digitalization, and cybersecurity, and what we do in everyday life in many quarters of the world. And appropriate handling of data is required, of course, as you've mentioned. And digitalization and digital infrastructure support modern societies and help to deliver inclusive economic growth that maximizes the benefits of digital technologies, including emerging technologies and artificial intelligence. In particular, recognizing the critical role of data as an enabler of economic growth, development, and social well-being, we need to discuss the international policy that harnesses the full potential of cross-border data flows under the concept of the FFT, data-free flow with trust, that we've discussed at G7 Digital and Technology Minister meetings. We share the trust, and the trust should be built and realized through various legal and also voluntary frameworks, guidelines, standards, technologies, and other means that are transparent and protect data. At the G7 Digital and Tech Ministers meeting last month, we recognized the need to accelerate and operate the work of DFFT. The interests were expressed by stakeholders, such as health, including pandemic response, climate change, and varied IoT uses, including mobility. So while recognizing our valid approach to data governance, there are challenges such as security, privacy protection, data protection, and the protection of intellectual property rights. So to achieve DFFT embodiment, we set 5 core areas that could be called our guiding stars: ensuring transparency, technology, and standardization, interoperability, complementary with related systems, and implementation of the DFFT embodiment.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I hope to develop some of those themes. Let me turn to Professor Kokuryo and mention and ask you about some of your views on some of these issues. Your book talks about an Asian perspective on cyber governance that may differ from the Western perspective. And I wonder if you could tell us briefly what that is and what some of your philosophy is about cyber civilization and the governance challenges.
Of course. Oh.
Yes. Please.
Peter, can I talk?
Please go ahead. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Excuse me, Makishima-san. Okay. Well, first of all, I mean, thank you for this great opportunity to discuss this. Keio University and is very happy to work with Wall Street Journal on covering this very important topic. And as for your question, as Dr. Makishima mentioned, there's a very strong need, I think, for a generally acceptable rules in terms of really we have mutual interest. We being the entire world have mutual interest in taking advantage of data to bring social good to the world. At the same time, there are some serious concerns about misuse of data, and that we have to come up with a generally acceptable. I mean, I would say acceptable. I mean, may not be agreeable, but sort of a generally acceptable rule among nations and among the groups and among the camps. So that the benefits of the technology can be bring good things to people's life. And my point has been that I think this is agenda for the upcoming Group of 7 summit meeting. Is that we need to engage not just the big Western countries and Russia and China. We really have to think seriously about having people of Africa, people of Asia, people of South America, participate in this general framework. And in order to do that, I think we should go beyond our conventional, thinking. And I brought up Asian philosophy because it's something that I know better than others. But I think we need, that the book has been sort of a proposal to think beyond the conventional norms and think big, think global, and come up with a general framework.
Thank you. Let me turn to Josh. Of course, we've seen more tension on that front, unfortunately, recently between China and the rest of the world. And I mentioned briefly a moment ago, China's crackdown on some companies that are involved in information gathering. They're sometimes called due diligence companies. Tell us more about what's going on in China and what that tells us about the Chinese Communist Party's philosophy of data.
Right. Well, you really couldn't dream up a better or better timed news cycle for this gathering. So on Monday, China's state broadcaster CCTV reported that the country's security agencies have launched a nationwide investigation into Western business intelligence firms. Right, these are companies that sort of collect data on the economy and on industry. Basically investigating them on the suspicion that they're aiding foreign espionage by gathering and sharing state secrets with their clients, some of which include foreign governments. And one of the main targets of the investigation is a company called Capvision, which specializes in gaining clients access to important local players and experts in various industries. According to Chinese state media, the Capvision experts were providing sensitive information on energy, defense, technology, and other sensitive industries to people outside of the country. That's actually only part of the story. As Peter mentioned, China recently expanded its espionage law. It's also now recently started limiting access to a data provider called Wind that many foreign businesses and investors rely heavily on for insight into China's economy. It has also cut off overseas access to academic journals, to public procurement databases, and even official statistical yearbooks. So really, China sort of is increasingly becoming a black box to people who are outside of the country. And all this has created a lot of confusion because it was only recently the Chinese leaders were being really aggressive in trying to recruit foreign business to help the Chinese economy recover from COVID. So a lot of people were wondering why are they now cutting off information that foreign businesses need in order to do business in China? And I think, all of this makes more sense when you realize the importance that China's Communist Party puts on data. Chinese leaders don't think of data as important. They've actually woven it into their entire model of governance, right? So if you think about democracies have a lot of feedback mechanisms, right? They have elections, they have the free press, and those feedback mechanisms help democracies uncover and solve problems, right? And so China doesn't really have any of that, but it does have a huge amount of data. And the Communist Party believes that it can use data analysis to build a sort of new, better form of government, one that can sort of spot problems faster than democracy, maybe even predict problems before they exist, and exercise really tight social control. So you can see this already with social media data, which the government analyzes to project sort of when and where protests might break out. They look at the language that is coming out of certain areas on social media and try to see if there's local anger that might break out into protests. You also saw it during the pandemic when the government was using a combination of location data and surveillance technologies to lock down hundreds of millions of people simultaneously. So, the Chinese government really sees data as one of its most precious resources, if it's not its most precious resource, and it sees the security of that data as probably its biggest priority, even a bigger priority than economic growth.
Let me turn again to Dr. Makishima. You were in government. You've addressed these issues with other G7 leaders, and we heard Josh say that China has a philosophy recently of really tightening control over data. You talked about data free flow with trust. This seems like a very limited flow of data, and maybe the government, I don't know who trusts whom in China exactly, but maybe the government does not trust its people to speak up. So how does Japan and other G7 nations, deal with what seems like a different philosophy about data and data free flow?
As Josh has mentioned, I think it is important how to use the data. What is the goal of the use of the data? So it should not be the new forms of government. It should be the better society for all. So these are the concepts and philosophy we share in G7 countries or like-minded countries. The international cooperation to improve transparency of regulations are essential. When we discuss information sharing or reporting system or sharing guidelines and the best practices, so trust is very important and essential. And when we transfer data to third countries, international understanding to ensure privacy and security and collaboration to build standards with many industries and stakeholders are necessary. So it is not for the government, but it's for the people or for the industries or for the economic growth or the better society. So these are the core understood a concept of us, I think.
I see. Professor Kokuryo, you've expressed concern, that it seems like increasingly we have one group that has a certain set of principles that they can mostly agree on, and then China with a different set of principles. And people talk about decoupling or maybe de-risking with respect to China. I mean, how do you see, are we on a road towards decoupling where there's data shared with trust between a certain group of countries, including Japan, and then a different sort of standard for data in China?
Well, of course, we should be mindful, really mindful, that the world is really feeling the pain of decoupling. I mean, we talk about the inflation and the interest rate and the collapse of banks and so forth. But when you sort of take a broad view of the world, I mean, we are talking about decoupling the world into sub-optimized supply chain, and inflation in that sense is bound to come. And if the entire world, I mean, the rest of the world, thinks this is simply a hegemony war between China and America, then I think we will have everybody against us. So I think we should, and in that sense, again, let me re-emphasize, we should be listening very carefully to the voices of other parts of the world, so that we can address their pain. I mean, some of the countries are going through banking crisis, even this moment. And so we should be mindful of what we are. I mean, and that kind of thing is very destabilizing. So I really want to call upon both camps to get serious about coming to some kind of general framework. And in my book, I really agree with Dr. Makishima. Is that the single issue that we want to address is that, are the governments really working in the interest of people rather than the power? I mean, similar things sort of applies to, I mean, there's a lot of criticisms against big platform providers, commercial providers, really using the data for the sponsor's benefit rather than the user's benefit. So I think there's a lot of conflict of interest on both camps, and the democratic world should get our own store in order to really take position I agree that giving too much data power to government is dangerous. We know that from history. But in order to address that, we need to come up with a common consensus that the data is to be used for the people.
Josh, for your book, let me mention, by the way, that we've already gotten some great questions from the audience before this webinar began, and you're welcome to add your questions in the Q&A box as we continue the discussion here, and in the final portion of the webinar. I hope to bring some of these audience questions to our panelists today. But both of you mentioned other countries, not just the US and China fighting with each other, and Japan caught in the middle, but also countries in Africa, South America. And Josh, I know for your book, you actually visited Uganda in Africa and saw some of China's efforts there to help the governments maybe monitor its citizens. I'm not sure if that's, again, a free flow with trust or limited flow with lack of trust. But talk about what you learned about how countries that are not in any camp, such as in Africa, view this, these discussions over data.
Well, it's really interesting to hear Dr. Makishima and Professor Kokuryo talk about the need for democracies to get their ownership in order to develop a sort of democratic model for data governance, because I think the example of Uganda and sort of Africa writ large really crystallizes that question, right? So in Africa, China has a large presence. Chinese telecom companies have a large presence, and they've been actively selling sort of Chinese surveillance systems and this Chinese approach to the use of data. And what's really interesting about this is some people wonder, oh, is China trying to replicate its model around the world? And I think what the example of Uganda shows is that it's not actually doing exactly that. What's happening is it is pushing this idea that governments should decide how to use data, and it's that whatever governments want to do with data, with surveillance technology, it's up to them and it's fine, right? It's sort of a kind of a bit of a free for all, right? And so what happened in Uganda, what you saw there when I was visiting, is the leader of Uganda, Yoweri Museveni, has been in power for a very long time, but he at the time was facing a very serious challenge from a young pop singer sort of turned politician who was really attracting a lot of support from the youth. And so there were a lot of protests over his policies, and he felt like he was losing control. So he turned to the Chinese government. He went to the ambassador in the capital for help, and the ambassador sort of brokered a deal with Huawei, the Chinese telecom company. They took Ugandan police on a trip to China. They went to Beijing, where they went to the Ministry of Public Security and were given a demonstration on how China uses data and surveillance technologies to exercise control. They went to Huawei's offices, where they saw another demonstration, and then they came back and bought a sort of state surveillance starter kit, which Yoweri Museveni then used in the most recent presidential election to track down political opponents. And that's an election he won, that a lot of observers believed that maybe he shouldn't actually have won. And it's, Uganda is a country that receives a lot of US aid. For a long time, people thought that it was going to become a sort of model democracy for Africa. But at least recently, it was China had a vision to sell. And that was an attractive vision for Uganda. And I think there are a lot of people who sort of feel that right now, democracies don't have a comparable vision to sell. And that there are a lot of different ideas, a lot of different models in Europe, the US, the UK. There's a lot of different ideas about how to approach these technologies, but there isn't one yet that people have sort of agreed on and tried to sell as an alternative to China.
One, as you mentioned, Josh, governments, some governments feel like they can do anything, and even in the US, a lot of people are talking about, as I mentioned in the opening, about banning TikTok. And we had a number of questions already from the audience about that, asking, should TikTok be banned by the US, or how about Japan? Should Japan do that? But on the other hand, is that falling into the same situation that countries like Uganda are doing, where the government is in control of the information, and the government says this app is banned. We in the government think that you shouldn't have the right to use that app. Is that going too far? Is that also overreach, even by a democratic country like the US? So Dr. Makishima, I wonder if you could kind of address the TikTok the question, and how do you view that, how to regulate an app like TikTok, which is ultimately owned by a Chinese company?
We have the organization in Japan called NISC, the Cabinet Cybersecurity Center, and it has the jurisdiction over restriction on the use of TikTok by government officials. So it prohibits the use of confidential information on SNS and cloud services. And government officials cannot use TikTok with devices that handle confidential information. That is a rule we have right now. But now LDP parliamentarians have started some discussions and wondering if we should create some kinds of systems that can take measures such as suspension of services when fake information is sent through SNS, such as TikTok. So we discuss if a political party in the country makes a malicious and intentionally influential message, we should immediately consider suspending its services. So with these rules, we think we can warn against app operators and protect 17 million Japanese users.
How would that work? How do you make that decision, or who makes the decision that information spread on social media is actually malicious, and not just free speech, and not just somebody's opinion that they have a right to express? Who makes that decision, and how?
Just last month, we built the organization under the Cabinet Office relating to the treating with the disinformation, and they discovered fake news or disinformation in their cyberspace, and they send some kinds of warnings or announcements to the public. So searching the cyberspace and delivering the messages will be their core role as the organizations of the Cabinet Office. So we've just started the new organization, but at the same time, some colleges or universities or think tanks or media-related private sectors send messages through SNS. This might be fake. You need to understand the backgrounds information of these news or these stories, and you need to recheck the facts, like the fact check centers on Twitters.
I see. So you're saying it's not an absolute ban, or it's not blocking them, but it's just telling the public, hey, this is something we've looked at and we find is a problem.
Yes, we now started the discussions. So if necessary, we might to consider making the new laws or regulations, but still we are now in the process of discussions.
I see. What advice, Professor Kokuryo, what advice would you give these ruling party members of parliament and people in the government as they consider these types of steps?
Well, I may be overly optimistic, but being in academia, and I guess you, Peter, being in journalism, I think constraining free speech is the last thing we want to do, right? And I think I generally support Dr. Makishima's position that the best solution is to really develop our own capability to fight against any fake or manipulative acts on the internet. And sort of for many, in the history of internet, I mean, there were a lot of talk about protecting intellectual property rights through blocking, tweaking on the domain name system and so on and so forth. And we have been consistently being against it in support of countermeasures rather than blocking any kind of free flow of information. But of course, where that so that's why the last character T, DFFT, T becomes the critical factor. So at this point in time, I maintain that position. Maybe if it gets too much, maybe there's a point we have to say it's too much.
Dr. Makishima, you're. Oh.
Sorry about this ambiguous answer.
Well, if it was an easy question, we wouldn't be asking it. But Dr. Makishima, you're a public figure. You run for office. You have to, speak in public, and people say things about you. I'm sure when you were in the cabinet or now online, some of them probably friendly, some unfriendly. In your experience in public life, how have you? How have these issues affected you, and the issue of social media being out of control, perhaps?
Social media is the enjoyable tool for many, especially for the young, to express their feelings or their opinions. These are the tools of the democracy in Japan. So we use SNS to deliver our messages or the plans of the policies, or sometimes festivals of our districts. So we share information through SNS. So how to use the SNS or these space to be fairly used and not to be misused. So how to use will be the issues we need to share with the people, not only the young, but for all.
I've noticed in China, turning to you again, Josh, there is still an active sort of culture of comment in China, even though the Communist Party tries to suppress it, and people come up with all kinds of clever ways to express their opinions, even in these tough times. Where do you see, can social media still be a way to promote, I wouldn't say democracy, but at least some limited democratization in China, or is that hope past us?
Yeah, it's one of the more amazing experiences being a journalist covering China is just to watch the sort of cat and mouse game on social media, right? Of people trying to outrun the censors. And it just leads to a sort of amazing creativity in sort of language and expression that I don't think you really get maybe in any other country. And Chinese internet users are incredibly clever, they're incredibly nimble, and they have used, in the past, they've used social media to push for change, right? I mean, obviously not democracy, not a two-party system. That's sort of out of the realm of possibility, at least in the near term in China, but they have used social media to force the government to change policies or to pay attention to problems that were not priorities before. I think, what's interesting is the way that data, to get back to data, the way that data analysis works, right? And that AI, predictive AI works, right? Is by taking a huge amount of data about what's happened in the past and trying to predict what will happen in the future, right? So the way this plays out on social media is that Chinese censors are very good at quashing speech that has happened in the past, right? So if people are talking about Tiananmen Square, the Chinese government has mountains of data about the various different ways you could talk about the Tiananmen Square protests, all the different permutations and slang you might use to refer to Tiananmen Square. They know it already. They have all that data, and they can identify it and zap it before you even know it's there. But they don't have data on new problems, right? So you saw this with COVID-0, for example. There were huge protests in China at the end of last year in November, December, over the COVID zero policy, both in real life and online. And because the censors didn't really have data on those protests, these were new, it was a new issue, they weren't actually able to control that message initially. But they did eventually catch up, right? And they are getting faster and faster and better at catching up. And so I think the answer in China is that there's still a little bit of room for social media to play a role in sort of public life in China, but it is a diminishing one at the moment.
You mentioned AI, which is the topic of the day. Everyone's talking about it. In fact, my editor back in New York has basically ordered all of us to try out ChatGPT. Fortunately, I've tried it already. Everybody's trying it. And it has so many potentials beyond what we can discuss today. But both, as you said, Josh, as an additional tool for an authoritarian government to control its people, but also it could be a great business tool. Maybe AI will write our news articles or write our academic papers or our speeches in Parliament someday, maybe quite soon. So it's just a preliminary question, but let me go back to you, Professor Kokuryo. What's your take, your view of the AI developments and how they can be directed in a positive way?
Yeah, I've been involved in the discussion of ethics in surrounding AI for the last 7 years or so. Things have been developing very fast in the last year, but in general, I think things that we predicted will happen is starting to happen, but at a much faster rate. And here is another place where, the Asian perspective perhaps is useful. I see very big difference between the West and the East, if I may generalize East, on how people view autonomy, how people, the West is, the current Western industrial civilization is based on this hypothesis that human beings are the monopolizer of intellect. And that actually, and so it's almost that cannot accept existence of machine having intellect. And that kind of attitude, I'm afraid, doesn't exist in Asia, actually. Asia has been, particularly in Japan, if you go to shrines, you saw people worshiping stones. Spirit resides everywhere, and human beings are just part of the cosmos rather than at the center or at the top of it. And while we would like to be a very respected member of the nature, we don't have to control it. That's sort of the basic attitude in Asia, and perhaps West should learn to adopt that kind of attitude. This applies not just to AI, but for things like sustainable development. Is that we should be a very humble part of the nature rather than trying to be in control, either for the good or bad, kind of thing, right? So this is one place where we should really think about what it is that we truly want to accomplish. Of course, we don't want the machines to be dictating or killing human beings. So I'm not debating against that, but I think we should take a broader view and think about the fundamental philosophy and ethics to govern. AI is a reality now. We cannot run away from it, and I agree that the ChatGPT at this point in time I don't think we should be threatened too much about it, but the time will come. So we should be ready for it.
Do you think there are benefits of AI that I was glad to hear you say that you don't support robot overlords coming in and controlling our lives, which is kind of a Western stereotype. But are there benefits of AI that maybe the U.S. Or Western nations are missing because we're so concerned about the threat of it?
I mean, of course, I mean, like we Asia is facing this huge aging society, and we would seriously want help from robots in maintaining our lives, sustaining life, maintaining, helping elderly active as they're with the help of robots. So there are a lot of things that AI and robots can do for us. So we
What
should
about
be
you, Dr.
open.
Makishima? It's still early to start talking about legislating or regulating AI. We're just beginning to learn what some of the possibilities are. But how do you see some of these developments and the pluses and minuses?
Yes, as Dr. Kokuryo has mentioned, in Japan, we are facing one of the biggest challenges, that is the shortage of the workforce. So we need some kinds of AIs or technologies to support what the human beings should do. So these are the combination of our human being and also the AI technologies to accomplish the missions or the tasks that are given as the workforce. And as G7 Digital and Technology Ministerial meetings has announced, AI should be the responsible one. And we need to trust the reasons how AI was used. And also it should be used as the solution of the challenges that we face in Japan and also in other countries. So we need to have some kinds of guidelines when we use AI, but we are not discussing the regulations as EU or the European countries has already started. And of course, we need to be careful that there is a risk of lies being mixed in ChatGPT, or a risk of spreading highly sophisticated fake information through ChatGPT or AI technologies. So as we do in our everyday lives, we eat some junk food and the body might get bigger, but we are not healthy. So they should eat healthy, trusted, good, high quality of things or data. Otherwise, the AI technology might be the just fat technologies and not healthy. So in Japan, we already decided to build a control and command tower for AI, and we should have some responsible minister for AI technologies. And also we need to discuss with other countries, or we might use some lessons or the guidelines that OECD might be interested in. So we need to have the discussions with G7 and like-minded countries. And also even in LDP, the white paper of AI was also handed in, and it proposed data resource aggregation and collaboration.
Interesting. So the next Kishida cabinet may have an AI minister.
Yes.
That's interesting.
That might happen in the very near future.
Wow. And once again, the word trust came in, and we talk about data free flow with trust, but also the flow of AI with trust, and not just garbage food or as you said, fatty food, a bad diet that just makes us unhealthy. We want AI to make us healthier in all respects. Well, we're getting a lot of great questions from our audience today, so I want to to jump on to some of these questions. Let's see here. One person asked about what companies can do. We've talked about tensions and differing perspectives on AI and data in the US, China, and elsewhere. What can companies do to prepare for these escalated tensions, asks a member of our audience, especially when there is a conflict of law regarding cybersecurity. Let's see, perhaps Professor Kokuryo, you want to take that one?
Thank you. Of course, the reality right now are companies trying to hedge risks and trying to deal with a variety of scenarios. That's the reality. Obviously, we want to get out of that mode to start a more constructive discussion or sort of institution making. There are several technologies. Let me point out just one technology, which is distributed ID systems, that allows better control by the individuals to of their personal data while giving opportunity to share data in the ways that the individual want. Simply, I mean, it's not simply like clicking yes and you're given sort of a white blank check to use data. Sort of the technology allows people to know what the data is being used for, so that people with altruistic mind will be more willing to share data. There are various technologies to give incentive back for doing social contribution of data for things like advancement of medical knowledge. So we should also, I mean, we should, instead of just fearing about the technology, we should look at some of the technological opportunities to really realize the ideal way of using data for people's benefits, while of course companies can take a fair share of the value it's being created. So right now, people, I'm afraid people have a fair amount of skepticisms about how data are being monetized by companies. So it's really about developing business model that really benefits people while giving companies a fair share return for their efforts. So really, I would really encourage companies to take that kind of forward-looking view. It's almost like similar to SDG question of can you build a really a business model that companies profit by doing good things for the world? And there are opportunities.
Fascinating. Let me ask, this is a question for a lawmaker, Dr. Makishima. Somebody asks, one of our audience members asks, what do you think about the lack of an anti-spy law in Japan? Should Parliament pass a law that, I mean, I think there is a law in Japan against spying, but perhaps a more comprehensive anti-spy law, perhaps thinking of what China is doing. What's your view on that?
Interesting. Before answering that question, I'd like to mention the IEP, that is the institutional arrangement for partnership that G7 digital ministers have agreed on last month. So I want the private sectors and industries in Japan or other countries to join this IEP process. It's not about the governmental agreement, but it's open to the public sectors and also private sectors. And we like to bring stakeholders together to operationalize the concrete DFFT ideas through principle-based, solution-oriented, evidence-based, and multi-stakeholders and cross-sectoral corporations. So it should be two areas. One will be the competition area, but we should have the cooperation area. So we need to have some kind of guidelines to share standard for the basic data. So that might be easier for us and faster for us to bring the solutions to the society that we face. And about the anti-spy law, I know some LDP or other political party members have so much interest in this discussion. And also the last December, we made it clear that the Kishida Prime Minister and the cabinet took the importance of the cybersecurity or the economic security or the security clearance. And security clearance as one of the tools to make each person to be trustworthy, or we can find the right people who can join the study that might relate to the defense industries, or the people who can share the intelligence. So just last December, we've started the discussions, which is security cleared and which is not, or which is the secrets should be, or the information that should be protected by the government or not. So we've just started the process, and also it's not only about the data, it's not about the industry, but also the persons or the people of the security cleared. So we just started these mixed issues just from the December as the lawmakers.
I see. So it's kind of beginning that work. Josh, let me throw a question at you here. Perhaps asked by a Japanese listener, I don't, or participant, I don't know, but the person asks, are there any risks involved in using a system developed and managed in China for a company in Japan? It's been a lot of discussion in the US, I think, about, potential threat from Chinese developed systems. But, what's the reality? Is any country that uses some kind of technology or software developed in China, are they putting themselves at risk, or is that hyping the threat? Is that going too far?
Yeah, it probably depends a little bit on case by case basis. What sort of software are you using and what sort of data is involved? But I mean, I think the thing to remember is that ultimately, and this definitely applies in the TikTok case and in other cases, and has been an issue in debates around companies like Huawei. Ultimately, the Chinese law and just Chinese political reality dictates that if a Chinese company has data that the government wants to access for national security reasons, then those companies are obligated to hand it over. And there are ways for companies to resist, and there are stories of Chinese companies that have sort of thrown up barriers. I mean, they don't want to share their data openly with everyone either, because that's a large portion of their company value is tied up in that data. But ultimately, when push comes to shove, if the government wants that data, they'll get it. And the problem in China is that national security is a broad topic and getting broader. What can fall under the rubric of national security? It's vague and expanding all of the time. So I think the short answer is there is risk if for any company using Chinese systems that especially if they have sensitive data that the China's government might have interest in, they could access it.
One of our participants comments in terms of the stabilization of democracy. I agree with Professor Kokuryo's idea that there must be a certain consensus that data should be used for the good of the people instead of a tool of the government's own interests. So this person asks, how will this consensus be formed in a democratic society? How can we form a consensus about using data for the good of the people? Is it through laws? Is it through discussions on social media? Is it political? How does this get done in real life?
Are you asking me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Well, it has to be a combination of all these. And plus from educational institution, we would like to play educational role too. I think in order to solve the issues that we are facing globally, it's a must. I mean, we cannot keep on fighting. So we really have to come up with something. And I think that I'm hopeful that that kind of pressure will push us into a direction that of greater trust in the world.
Dr. Makishima, last comment on that big issue of how do we form a consensus on these issues?
Yes, as Dr. Kokuryo mentioned, we share some global issues like the global warming or the environmental issues. And at the time, we need to have the exact data or the numbers or figures when we discuss the green transformation or the carbon footprints, etc. So we need to discuss these global issues first and how to solve these issues. So we need these kind of the right data or the trustworthy data. So we need to form some kinds of groups to transfer each other. So how to transfer data will be the key. So we cannot transfer data where we cannot find the rules of data protection. So we need to set the basic principles or guidelines. And when these countries agree with the concept or the philosophy, we can transfer data. So it should be that simple.
Thank you very much for those comments. And, you know, I think we've heard today about the importance. You mentioned the word trust several times, the importance of trust, of international cooperation, not just among the G7 countries, but also among those countries that may feel left out of these discussions. We've heard about some concerning developments in China from Josh, who's been covering this for about a decade now. And I really liked your analogy between fat and fatty food and good food, Dr. Makishima, and that's, I think, what all of us, certainly media, academia, are about. What we try to be at the Wall Street Journal as well is a provider of healthy information and a provider of a lot of viewpoints, and encourage the kind of debate and discussion that we've had today. So once again, many thanks to you, to our audience, for the great questions. I'll mention one. This is one upcoming event, excuse me, from the Wall Street Journal and our Future Leaders webinar. We have a Future Leaders webinar coming up on May 23rd about the future of the Asian economy. Is it still resilient? And that's a conversation with the Hong Kong University HKU ST Business School. So keep an eye out for that. Thank you, Dr. Makishima. Thank you, Professor Kokuryo. Thank you, Josh. And that will be the end of our webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.